Are there details that can be changed for consistency's sake or for the cost? When they come back and want something revised, educating them on what that will do to their cost, their production, and things like that.
Yeah, I imagine even some of those decisions are branding moments, right? Like choosing a certain style stitch or a contrast stitch.
Exactly.
Or, things that can affect price, but also can become a signature for the brand.
Exactly.
Welcome to Clothing Culture, a fashion industry podcast at the intersection of technology and innovation. I'm Emily Lane.
And I'm Bret Schnitker. We speak with experts and disruptors who are moving the industry forward and discuss solutions to real industry challenges.
Clothing Culture is produced by Stars Design Group, a global design and production house with more than 30 years of experience. Welcome back to another episode of Clothing Culture. I'm pretty excited about this conversation. Bret, are you?
Certainly excited.
Of course you are. Of course. Well, this is this is a topic that centers around efficiencies when it comes to tech design and production. And this whole concept came into being when we were talking with our great friend, Annie Cohen, who joins us today, who is the consulting director of technical design for Stars Design Group. And Bret, you have always attributed Annie as being the most technically minded person you've ever met, which I think
agree.
is pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, for sure.
Bret, you've always said designers, they're artists. They just use fabric instead of paintbrushes in our industry. But yet tech design, they're the architects of our industry. And I always think that tech design is it is an unsung hero of our industry because not only do you have to understand how a garment needs to look and feel, but you have to be able to communicate that so that it actually sees its full life. And Annie, when you and I were talking one day, we were reviewing a prospective client's their garments and everything, and we were looking at it, and you said to me, Emily, this was not even designed to go into production. And a light bulb went off. I'm like, what do you mean? Give me some insights there. So let's talk a little bit about what are some of those cues when you looked at that garment and you're like, oh my gosh, this wasn't even meant for production. So I'd love some of those thoughts. But just as a setup for today, everybody, we're going to kind of talk through some of the ins and outs of decisions that can be made all throughout the process from a technical perspective to really maximize efficiency in garment making. So Annie, what are some of those cues that you were like, we are off track?
Yeah, right. Well, when I first looked at that garment, and I remember it very vividly, I could see that there were...
No arms. That's a problem. And it was a pant.
Right. There was no way to get into it.
No way to get in.
I did see that there were multiple kinds of stitching and joining of parts that were more complex than they needed to be, number one. Number two, they weren't the appropriate types of stitching. And the fabric wasn't supporting the functionality of the garment. So those were the key things.
So besides that, it was fine.
Besides that, it was beautiful. Yes. So the nerdy side of fashion is where I stepped in and looked at it and saw that technically it should have been cleaned up before it ever was presented to be a manufactured garment.
And there's always this interesting tension between kind of designers, if you will, and technical design.
Yeah.
But it's such a critical step because, and it's bigger than you would imagine, just walking in and saying, okay, I understand what the designer wants to do. I'm going to create the blueprint, the technical sketch, the bill of materials, the stitching detail. That's only the beginning of what we're going to talk about tonight. You also, in our world, because most of the stuff is commercial design, we've got to make it hit price points. And part of that are these big, massive key elements in production of things you can control, right?
Right.
Consumptions, speed of sewing, cost of labor, all these different components you have to be considering those as you're building
Absolutely.
this technical.
Absolutely. I think that there's a whole nother part of the process that often gets overlooked when someone meets with a designer and wants to help them take their garment and their design and their idea to manufacturing. And I think what is skipped sometimes is helping that designer learn.
Yeah.
And you have to, at some point, be an educator. And you have to help them understand how they can make good choices and be okay with things. And sometimes you have clients who you don't need to explain anything to. You just need to do it.
Make a decision.
Because it
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
Sure.
But to be successful, I think, in partnering with a designer, you have to understand what they're looking for, who their customer is, who they are, and what their brand they want it to be represented. Is it are there details that can be changed for consistency's sake or for the cost? When they come back and want something revised, educating them on what that will do to their cost, their production, and things like that.
Yeah, I imagine even some of those decisions are branding moments, right? Like choosing a certain style stitch or a contrast stitch,
Exactly.
or things that can affect price, but also can become a signature for the brand.
Exactly. I think that consistency can create the opportunity for a signature. So if you are producing new styles and you maintain a certain stitch type or top stitching or the way that a collar is shaped or something like that, there are ways to make it efficient by repetition, and that becomes a branding opportunity and a signature to that style.
Those are a lot of early considerations before you even get from the design to the technical, right?
There's a combination of merchandising, design, product development, technical design, and manufacturing. And it all has to be cohesive and compatible.
Talking about the design phase, are there additional decisions that can be made during this time that can really make sure that you're set up for success by the time your garment gets into production?
Definitely. There's a big difference between making those decisions for a new customer, someone who is entering into the world of design and fashion and the industry, and someone who is a seasoned, experienced merchandising brand, an established brand. So if you have someone who's brand new, you are, again, educating them. And one of the important decisions is fabric selection and trim selection. And the most important thing about fabric selection is to select a fabric that will perform as you have designed it. So often I have seen people select fabric that does not work with the garment. And so it has to support the design elements. And if it doesn't, then you will not have success and you'll go back to the drawing board. So one of the really important things is selecting the proper fabric. It could be too thin, it could be too heavy, it could be too sheer, it could be, not stable enough to maintain design elements that have a real specific line to them. So picking the right fabrics is really important.
I imagine even making sure that certain fabrics that you're pulling into a garment work well together.
Exactly. Absolutely. Work well together. You want to always choose things that have the same care instructions because that definitely can come into play. You don't want to put a fabric that can't be dry cleaned with a fabric that has to be dry cleaned, for
Sure.
example.
That's why we put the label "Do Not Clean."
That
Solves it completely.
Yep.
Just do not clean.
That's a disposable garment.
Yes, right.
Yeah. I can definitely see, and there's all these little spots where those kinds of errors can take place, like pocket lining, or I could just see the opportunity for.
And that is why it's so important to also understand the consumer and the segment of the market that you are working in, because a designer can design something and want to be within a price point. But again, you have to make sure that the fabric selections are appropriate for that consumer market. A low cost, volume, commodity item should not be a dry clean item. things like
Sure.
that. So you also have to think about those kinds of things.
Wow. Okay. That's great thinking. Tell me about piggybacking.
Yes, I love piggybacking. When you have an established brand, one of the best things you can do is piggyback. So as merchandisers know, when you bring forth a new season, you will have carryover styles from the previous season. You might refabricate them in different colors and different prints, and maybe some small changes. And then you'll have some brand new items. Even the brand new items should piggyback off of an old item that is tried and true. You have a successful business and a successful garment, so your next garment should pull in the elements of fit and construction.
The things that were successful.
Exactly. The things that
Evolution,
were-
not revolution. I don't know where I've heard that before, but it just came to my head.
Yeah. What did we say also? Inspiration, not duplication.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a new one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So piggybacking is when you might have a brand new style that looks brand new, but you are still picking up from an existing style that's successful, and you're making sure the fit is consistent. You're making sure your seam finishes are consistent. A lot of that is internal in the garment, and most of the consumers are not even going to be aware of it.
Yep.
But from an efficiency standpoint, boy, can you jump ahead. Patterns exist and can be revised with simple changes, and it becomes a new garment. You might refabricate, which can change some things, and you have to be cognizant of that. But anything you can do to pull from history,
Right. You don't have to
Saves all
reinvent
this-
every time.
Exactly.
Right? You've got these blocks in place or these patterns
Exactly.
in place for.
Yep. And,
This-
and the other thing that helps with is bulk ordering. So if you're always going to use the same pocket bags are very low consumption, right? So if you can always use the same pocket bag lining, then you can bulk order for all of your styles that have pockets. And of course, that's if it's compatible.
Yeah.
But that's one of the kinds of things that you want to do. And also your interlinings, all of those
Controlling the
things.
cost of the material,
Right.
basically.
And there are some times when we can say, don't reinvent the wheel.
Right.
Yeah. If it's not broke, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, right, for sure.
You mentioned consumption. How do you manage consumption at this phase of the process?
There's a couple of key things, I think. One of them is that you make sure that your patterns are efficient in many ways. So there's a toss-up between material consumption and the cost of your fabrics and labor, right? So it's usually about half and half, right, Bret?
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
usually about half and half, depending on your market, but that's pretty typical, your labor and your raw materials. So if you can be as efficient as possible and have a high usage item, but that it's efficient when you put it in the width of your fabric is also a key element. So a lot of times that is completely overlooked. If that is not part of your process, it goes to the factory for that. Make sure your communication is there and say, how efficient are your markers? Sometimes your communication is what helps the efficiency, because you can say, what's your efficiency on your markers? Well, we can only get one across. So we're wasting 20% of the fabric, 25% of the fabric. What can we do? What can we do? Well, maybe we can put a seam down the back. Maybe we can take an eighth of an inch off that width, and suddenly we can get to across.
And we've had situations where we moved from 57, 58 goods to 43, 44, or, narrower goods, because the utilization of that
Yep.
fabric is better. You're not wasting as much. There's a lot of adjustments you can make, understanding what that pattern needs
Right.
to be.
So the most important part of that is, what is your percentage of efficiency? So
Right.
my goal is always 80%. If I can't get 80%.
And you can calculate this at this planning
Yeah.
stage.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You have to know your ratio of sizes. You have to know what percentage you're
Right.
running in each size, because when you're laying out a pattern, a lot of people that haven't thought about it or don't have the experience, you would think, oh, I have 50 larges and 100 extra larges, and people go and lay out all the extra larges on a pattern. They cut all that, and they go and lay out all the larges on a pattern, and then they go cut that. That's not the case. An efficient pattern can utilize size pieces from all the size scales. And so when you understand the ratio of sizing, you're going to be able to lay in those pieces to the level of the overall cut, improving efficiency, because certainly a small element on a small size might be able to fit effectively with large elements on larger sizes.
It's
and
a puzzle.
improve that. It is an
I
amazing
was just
puzzle.
thinking it's a mathematical puzzle.
It
is
is.
what it is.
It is. And there are times also that if you want to get even more complicated, you can combine styles. So if you repeat a fabric, which is also a great idea, it creates cohesive design, and it creates a signature,
Yep.
and it increases your bulk of raw materials, where you can get a better price, right? So repeating them also means that you might have small pieces in other styles that can also fill in gaps. So, but that gets a little bit tricky with your calculations of your ratios and your orders. But
And when you throw in colored dye lots, you have to make sure that
Right.
all the components
Right.
for one garment come out of the same dye lot, because
Right.
in long distant history, I haven't really seen that situation lately.
Oh,
But
we've
people
seen
would-
it. We've seen it on a few projects that we've been.
Oh, not ones that we've made.
Evaluating.
Yeah, evaluating for sure.
Right. So,
but,
yeah.
But you would find that they would pull a shade from a different shade
Yes.
lot, sew it. It looks almost color blocked.
Right.
The colors don't match
Yeah,
up.
I mean, there
so.
are definitely if you're doing these kinds of things and you're looking that deep into the pre-manufacturing stage, you have to make sure that your partners, as far as manufacturing, are equipped to handle those kinds of things. You wouldn't ever want to write a purchase order and ask them to combine styles if they are not equipped to handle that complexity.
That's a really good question to ask to the other side that's engaging a firm.
Right. And that's where,
Yeah.
as I mentioned before, you want to understand the ability and capability of the factory that you are working with. And that also comes into play with choosing that manufacturer. If that is also something that you are doing, you want to make sure that you have compatibility with your styles then as well. You're not going to send a swimwear piece to a men's suit manufacturer.
Right.
And sometimes factories will say, oh, yeah, we can do that. And you open up a whole can of worms because they don't have the experience.
Or
and
maybe
they don't have
not
the
even the right equipment, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Or it's a bikini with a vest, which looks weird.
Yeah.
Just looks strange.
You might have just discovered the next trend.
Or
but-
a thong suit.
A thong suit. That would be, I think Wall Street should see that.
Absolutely.
Well, speaking of thongs and suits,
I never thought we'd get there.
let's talk about the extra details, things like trims, buttons, all of that. I'm sure that there are decisions that can be made that, again, are, really maximizing your production cycle.
Yeah. If you go with a branded button, which is very common, I've seen it around here, then use that branded button on everything you can. Again, a signature item. And you have costs of creating something that is branded for you, so make the most of it. And that helps a lot.
Yeah.
And when it comes to fabric, backing up just a little bit and selecting the proper fabrics, here at Stars, there is a library of thousands of sources and suppliers and types of fabrics to choose from. And the person here who works with that is amazing, amazing. You tell her what the properties should be, and she can find it. And that is really, really a big strength of Stars.
That's true. We have a librarian, if you will.
Oh, she's
Yeah.
amazing.
I totally agree. When we were talking about trims and sourcing various components, it's also something to be very mindful of. If we know we're producing a garment in India, for example, but we have goods that need to be imported to complete the garment, there are lots of things to consider.
Right. So one thing to think about is fragmentation. Fragmentation became popular 10, no, more than that, 20 years ago,
Time
probably.
flies when you're having fun.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Probably at least 20 years ago, where things would be made in different parts, would be made in different regions of the world,
Yeah.
and they'd all come together to create a garment. You might have, if you are there's a suit manufacturer that gets shoulder pads made in China. The lining gets made in Korea, and the fabric is made in India, and all of this has to come together. Well, we know now, especially with supply chain issues and transportation issues of goods, that has become extremely expensive. So you want to use the factory as a resource often and say, do you have a supplier for these things? When
Finding the verticality in
Yep.
a solution, if you can.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of
Exactly.
sense.
And shortening those long trips that those parts and pieces have
Yep.
to go.
Right.
And defragmenting.
Yeah.
It's like your hard drive, and you defragment and like pull it all together and shorten the travel.
And not every country can efficiently do that. We still have a
No.
number of countries that rely on foreign material, and they're mainly CM nations. But there is definitely opportunities in some of the more established countries to
Yeah.
have a good amount of verticality.
And one of the neat things I've learned too is when you have that open communication with the factory and you talk to them openly and often, sometimes they generate ideas that you can take back to your designer and say, hey, they have this as an option.
Yeah.
So being somewhat flexible and not being afraid to learn something new
Yeah.
and opening it up to that kind of dialogue can, in the end, prove really successful.
Yeah, I think sometimes people are afraid of this transparency that we actually all seek, but they're afraid to tell too much or give away too much, freedom to develop something, and it can hold back progress and better solutions.
These people are doing it every day.
Yeah.
They are truly experts, but experts that are improving their skill every day because they're actually doing it. America, as we've talked, has abdicated manufacturing, or for the most part, for years. These people are dealing with these issues all the time, and they understand those variances that we're talking about globally.
And truth is, you can find it. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look hard enough, nothing's really a secret.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So the last point that I really want to kind of talk about is just the the day of the life of a tech designer. What are things resources that you utilize and things that you do to make sure that you're maximizing your efficiency or tapping into knowledge base that you have at your hands or previous projects and that kind of
5-hour
thing.
energy at 4 a.m. and a cocktail at 6 p.m. Yeah.
And then another 3 or 4 hours.
Right.
I think with PLM systems, we've become more efficient because we have a data bank of information, right? But if we don't use it properly, it becomes less efficient.
Yeah.
So if we have naming conventions that are consistent.
You want to give an example of that?
Okay, so sometimes you want to filter by a
Sleeve.
sleeve. And so we have raglan sleeves, we have set-in sleeves, we have kimono sleeves. But
And
if
sometimes some of those sleeves have the same name, like there's the baseball sleeve and the raglan, right?
Exactly. So if we sometimes call it a baseball sleeve and sometimes we call it a raglan sleeve,
Right.
we're really reducing our chance of efficiency because, we're cutting our results in half when we run that search. So if we can make sure we have a naming, a consistency, and that actually, going a little deeper, same thing when patterns are being made, because there are
Absolutely.
functions within the CAD systems where you can swap pieces and you can reuse pieces, but searching for things it sounds so simple, but it is an issue if you're not using it properly.
It can be like old school libraries going to the card catalog and then having to go on a hunt, right?
Yeah, scavenger hunt. Yeah.
Right.
So using PLM to do that is really helpful. And again, it helps you to reuse work you've already done. You know, don't keep doing it over. You can use you've got a wealth of information and things to use.
Resource
Use them.
and knowledge,
Yep,
right?
it's resources that you can reuse.
Yeah, I think about so much of what you're doing, and you are this, as you talked about, a puzzle, a puzzle master, problem solver, a mathematician, all of these things, and if you can go back to that resource
Did
where
we
you've
say
always,
nerd? Yeah, because I think all of that together equals nerd.
I think it equals genius, but if
Were you in the AV department in high school too?
what's that?
Oh, pretending like she doesn't know what that means. Yeah.
I was in the orchestra. I
Oh,
definitely am
same
among
thing.
my peers.
Yeah.
But yes, I can see how being able to reuse work you've already done. You've already done the math.
Right.
You've already done the hard work. Now let's leverage it to aid you further and
Right.
for your mind to focus on other new contributions.
And
You can
today it's
think of them
important. We live in a microwave society. People want things and decisions moving quicker. Technology should help support that, but output's only as good as the input.
Right, right. And think of it as tools, really.
Yeah.
Like each piece of that is a tool. Use it.
Yeah.
Well, Annie, this has been such a pleasure. We've been friends now
you.
for several years, enjoying meeting each other at various, celebrity moments in the fashion scene. And it's been wonderful to bring you on our team at Stars.
Thank
and
you.
great to share some of your insights with our wonderful friends of Clothing Culture.
Thank you. It's
Thanks,
been a
Annie.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And don't forget to subscribe to stay apprised of upcoming episodes of Clothing Culture.